Hi, everyone. Welcome to More Than Numbers Live, a data show focused on turning data teams from support functions into engines of growth. I'm Ollie Hughes. I'm one of the co-founders of Count.co. We're a canvas-based BI tool to stop data teams building dashboards all day long and turn them into their organization's problem solvers. Each week, we interview an industry leader to talk to them about how they're turning their data teams into business value. And this week, we've got David Jayatillake. He is the VP of AI at Cube.co. He's a two-time founder previously. His last company was Delphi, which was a AI chatbot and was acquired by Cube. He's a good friend. David, thanks for joining me. How are you?
Thanks so much, Ollie. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. So to set the scene, I love to ask people a bit of an icebreaker question, which is, what BI tool, what was your first data tool that you used, which wasn't Excel? Because that's an obvious answer. What was the first BI tool or data tool that you first started using?
So it's a tough question, actually. It's somewhere between Tableau, which I used very briefly on a demo before I left the company, and I never put it into production, and then Business Objects, which was there when I joined WorldPay, like that.
Business Objects. Yeah. That one of the things I love about those I guess you say generation one BI tools, like the pre-Tableau tool generation, is they actually are better than you think. They actually are incredibly functional. I remember some demoing IBM Cognos, and I was like, actually, this tool has got a lot in it. It's slow and it's not fit for the modern architecture, but it's actually got a lot of stuff in it, which some even modern day tools don't have. Did you like it?
So this was a funny thing. I didn't really understand what it was at the time because it was part of a ELT process for me ETL, where I was extracting data from business objects to push into SQL Server to do other things with, because that's business objects setup and project was really, really, really old. And we weren't able to adjust it or do anything to it. So if we wanted to do anything further, we had to pull it out and do it in SQL Server.
That's the classic of those tools, is they were owned by IT, and that's where the other kind of Tableaus came in, because they could be used by marketing directly. It's a classic story, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, okay, thank you for that setting. That's a good answer. The next question we love to ask our guests, which is just to help set the context of where you are, what you're doing, is just talking through the data stack that you're using, the data setting you're in. Obviously, you're Cube, so Cube is it's a data vendor. You're using a tool for different purposes, perhaps. But just talk us through your data stack and the data setup at Cube. Obviously, everyone knows data at Cube, I guess. So maybe it's a bit nuanced, but tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, so Cube, obviously being a vendor like Count, we actually have every data tool that you could think of, right? Because we have to experiment on all of them. But what we have converged on for our actual internal stack that we use regularly for reporting is BigQuery. So we're a GCP shop, so we use BigQuery as our data warehouse. It's very very easy to use if you don't have much of a data team or a data team at all, which we didn't have until recently. Yeah. And then we use Cube on top, obviously. So we dog food, but it also makes things very, very easy for us then connect further tools to. So Cube is a semantic layer. For those of you who don't know what a semantic layer is, it provides an abstraction on top of a data model, like a typical relational data model that might be in your data warehouse, and then abstracts entities, their relationships, and how to aggregate them out so that when someone makes a request in terms of metrics and dimensions, all they have to do is ask for those. They don't need to write any code, and it compiles that request into executable SQL on the data warehouse. The answer. So that's a brief. That's what a semantic layer does. It does more, but that's the core part. So we use Cube on top of BigQuery, and so we build all our definitions of our metrics like ARR and NARR and all of the different ARRs that you have, and customer and events from our products all come into BigQuery, and then we build our metrics and dimensions there in Cube, and then we can connect actually pretty much any BI tool to Cube. So we have got Superset connected to Cube, but primarily we use Tableau for our core GTM and sales reporting. The reason we use Tableau is not because we think it's our favorite BI tool. In fact, it's not really my favorite at all. I find it a bit clunky to use, but It's actually, we use it because that's actually what a lot of our enterprise customers use. We want to focus on our enterprise customers in the coming years. And so we want to kind of feel their pain with using our products.
This is where you're different to any other like normal organization, is that you actually almost seek out eccentricities and a bit of pain just to understand the customer differently. That's probably where you're unique, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And, we also support Excel and Google Sheets. So that's like one cool thing where, everyone hates on Excel and Sheets because people just make up their own truth. But the joy of connecting Cube to those is that you get, governed metrics piped out there, which they can then do their normal stuff with afterwards more safely.
Do you hate people talking about semantic layers as being like a SQL generation machine? Like ultimately that's what it's doing. It's taking a API request of like, I want this thing, and it just goes and does the SQL for you. That's kind of its black box, isn't it? That's what it's doing under the hood. It's just a SQL rule set, which is really cool. Like, you're right, it's a powerful thing.
I don't think I hate that. I think it's like, it's true, but I think you kind of miss the point a bit by saying that, because the point is the abstraction of, this is a data structure of tables, and then what the semantic layer does is, it codifies how they fit together, how you should use them, and then because it's codified, someone doesn't need to know that in order to use the data model. They just need to ask for what they want there. And that the real power of the semantic layer is actually that compiler. Yes, it writes SQL, but it writes SQL from a request of linguistic objects. That's really its power.
And then the other thing, which I follow your blog, David's Substack, by the way, is an excellent. He writes one every single week, unless that has been for the last year or so, every single week, and it's always thoughtful. I can't believe how quickly you write these things out. You're a great writer, but recently you've been talking through how you've been exploring SQLMesh rather than DBT.
Yeah.
So I think you've adopted it now at Cube. That's the thing you've now picked as the thing you're going to use to build. So that is not you're putting to your early adopter branding here as a kind of an entrepreneur first. Like, tell us more about that journey.
Yeah. So people have been telling me about SQLMesh for a while, and I'm someone who's always been like a pretty big DBT fan, friends with the founders there and a lot of other people there. And I've always kind of cheered them on very openly, including in my blog. And then the thing that made me, there's like a number of drivers as to why I started looking at SQLMesh. Firstly, the founders and Tobiko as a company who look after SQLMesh and SQLglot, they're friends of Cube, and I met them in San Francisco in October, and that kind of got me thinking about, maybe I should actually look at this. And then immediately after that, they announced backwards compatibility for DBT, and that was like a turning point for me, because suddenly I realized, okay, they're too big to ignore now, because anyone who uses DBT can just start running DBT in SQLMesh and get some of the benefits of SQLMesh immediately without doing anything. And then they can get more once they start using the SQLMesh format of models and other things. And so that's why I thought, okay, now is the time to look at SQLMesh. And so I made that Advent series, I called it, of, one blog post about SQLMesh per day from December the 2nd to the 20th, I think.
It was daily.
It was daily, yeah, but daily for working days during December until Cube's office closed, which was the 20th.
That's amazing. I'm looking forward to the Count Advent series this year coming. But, that's really cool. I mean, that's so interesting stack. And then I guess just to touch on like the orchestra, like obviously Cube is a business. It has a variety of different people at different levels of data. Not everyone knows SQL in a data company, by the way, folks. That's just the way it is. But obviously the
almost true.
Yeah, well, particularly if you've got a semantic layer, you're trying to avoid people running SQL. That's the whole point. But so tell us how that fits. Are you running the data there? Like you're doing the modeling yourself, it sounds like, in SQLMesh, but is there a bit of a team?
So I've done a fair bit myself. Recently, I hired our first analytics engineer focused on our internal data. So he joined in October. He's been really great. So I actually have managed to step away from actually being hands-on in the code, because he's just very capable. And really what I'm doing is guiding him towards like good choices for the future rather than how to do specific things, because he figures those out by himself.
Yeah. It's quite funny now because you've basically gone full circle. You used to be an analyst, as we were discussing earlier, and then you've run a few different data teams and set up amazing data organizations. I've always been pretty envious of the legacy of the companies you worked in before, like List, etc., and WellPay. And then now you've founded some companies. Now you're back full circle, working within a company, running data, but in a vendor. It's a kind of full cycle thing for you.
Yeah.
That's great. I think you set the scene really well. Well, let's move on. Let's talk more about the topic for today, which is, as your title suggests, about AI. And I can't wait to hear what you have to say about this. It's a really fast-moving space. I think the more I speak to people in the community, they don't know what to make of AI. Some people are fearful. Some people are excited. Some people are just waiting to see what's really going to fall out. Obviously, what you hear on LinkedIn, folks, isn't necessarily what's happening on the ground. There's a lot of people pumping their flavor. And what we're hoping to hear from David today is talk through all the hype, but also get some tangibles and help us sort of think about where AI can be really helpful, but also where it isn't going to be a silver bullet. And I guess, David, I know we've talked about this before, how to frame this, because there's so much to tackle when it comes to AI, how to think about it. And one of the things I was going to suggest, as we do with every single guest we have, is just point to the tenets, the thing which we know is a framework for data team value, like how to think about what matters for a data team to drive value. And then from that, we can dive into different bits of it and just talk through how where AI is working, where it's not, and where the gaps are. So let's just quickly remind people of what the tenets are. There's 4 tenets, which we at this show stick to as like a framework for data team value. Tenet 1 is operational clarity, that a data team who's driving value is not just pumping out dashboards. They are trying to create a really concise view of the business, helping the business understand itself, creating signal from noise so the business feels as simple as possible. Number 2, it's all about problem solving, that rather than just providing data to the business to help them think through problems, you're actually facilitating problem solving, and data teams are the organization's problem solvers. Number 3, rather than moving away from the business and just assuming that people can self-serve, which is always a bit of that elusive white whale. Instead, it's about focusing on time to decision, minimizing time to decision, recognizing there's a range of different decision types in an organization, from operational to strategic, and a data team needs to be thinking about all the different types of decisions and supporting those workflows. And then number 4, measuring yourself, making sure that the data team is working on the right problems and has a degree of efficiency in the way that it's working. So those are the 4 tenets. David, I know you know this. I've bashed you with this many times over the last few years. I guess this is just to give us a bit of a framework to think about, where are we seeing AI working, where are we not? There's loads that's going on in this space. I just want to, how are you looking at this? Like, you're watching things more closely than most. Like, where are you seeing, outside the hype, where are you seeing AI actually being tangibly used day to day, like right now?
Okay, so I think firstly, it's probably worth kind of zeroing in on, I actually believe if AI can be much more helpful AI can be very helpful in many different settings and not just for analytical data. And if you think about outside of analytical data, there's a lot that can be done just by connecting AI to vectorized documents, and there's so much there that actually doesn't require a data team, just requires some software engineers, really.
Sure.
But if we zero in on data, and I mean like OLAP analytical data, when we're talking about data, if you think about the first one, which is like operating excellence, I believe.
Clarity, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if you think about that, the great thing about it is, with AI, it can go 2 ways. If you don't use something like a semantic layer to govern what the AI is allowed to reference and to govern how the AI accesses data, you will end up with less operational clarity than you started with, because the AI will generate its own version of the truth every time you request it. So if you have something like a semantic layer where the AI has this menu of measures and dimensions that it can choose from, and then also isn't asked to calculate those, it's just asked to request those. And those requests are much more similar to like, give me revenue by market channel. It's not that dissimilar to asking that question, it's just in JSON. And so you're just forcing the shape of the question to be in JSON. And so when you do that, you can get better operational clarity, because people aren't having to go and redefine those metrics or do it in Excel or something. They just ask for it and they get it. And what they get is the governed definition of it. And even if there is like 17 different versions of revenue, you get told which version you're given by the AI, and you can say that's not the one I wanted. The one I wanted didn't have depreciation and was based on an operating basis, right? And it will then go and read all of the descriptions for those metrics and choose the right one that you want according to closest like vector similarity in reality. And that is so much better. And you're going to get clarity, and people aren't going to invent the truth. They're going to use the engineer-defined versions of the truth in the semantic layer.
And rather than through like X dashboards and trying to like search for the report, which is the number you need, and that kind of thing. It's much more direct, much more efficient way to get to that number you care about. Yeah.
So for a number that's well governed, well understood, AI on top of the semantic layer does a fantastic job of finding that number. So I think that's like how I frame point one. If we move on to point two, problem solving. So I think this is where currently it can be helpful, because let's just say someone who's not very technically skilled, can't write SQL, doesn't really know how to use a BI tool very well, certainly doesn't know how to find the dashboard in like, the Night King's army of dashboards, right? They can find the answer they want very easily with AI, because they just say, I want to know marketing, which marketing channel is performing the best this month. And it will just find the CAC for marketing channel and order it that way. And here you go, the top one is paid or something like that. And that just makes their life so much easier. And they can get there in 30 seconds to a minute, right? Whereas if you were to ask a data team member, that can happen. Very rarely you can get an answer back in a minute, but the stars have to align for that to happen. Like that human's not at lunch or sleeping or not at work, and they aren't busy, and they know how to execute that question very quickly, and it basically never happens. Usually people wait days or weeks for that kind of answer. And so, like, if you think about that, solving a business problem, you might lose money because you're waiting that long for the answer, because you wanted to know how to spend differently, or you wanted to know how to take an action that was because something was costing the business money. So this is actually where speed is so important for these business stakeholders. I think one thing that's also coming, and it's probably something I'm going to be working on this year, is actually, what do we do beyond just that simple answer of give me this piece of data? It's like, how do we find out, this is the root cause of why that happened? And maybe that's drilling down through different permutations of dimensions. Maybe that's doing anomaly detection. But whatever that is, I think that's coming this year, where we'll go beyond that initial like BI type data pull, and we're going to give them like an answer and a why something happened, and maybe what should they do next.
I think that speaks to really what I think. I spoke to a friend of mine who works in private equity, who has been really looking at the space, and his very simple take. He's quite a minimalist, so he always like boils things down to a simple answer, which is not always true. But he's like, outside of AGI, which is like everything changes, AI is ultimately just a productivity tool. It's a tool to make difficult things easier. And what you described very well there, and there's two examples, is like just access to data becomes faster. Like nothing else. That it's not like you couldn't in before get hold of that metric. You can always, like, we already have semantic layers. We already have drag and drop tools, which actually aren't that complicated. It's just the speed at which you can get access to that particular number and not have to sift through like a few different definitions. But what you're describing now is, and that's true in problem solving as well. Like a human problem solving, just getting numbers to then problem solve in their head. Similarly, like it's just the speed of that process. But what you're recognizing now is like the people often forget about the spectrum of decision making. There's operational decision making, which I think AI can solve very quickly. The more complicated, more nuanced problem is really, I haven't seen anyone really tackle that really well yet. Is that what you're meaning by like what's going to come?
Yeah. So what we've seen are like some competitors out there, like Julius.ai, that people have been talking about. What they do is they take a single data set, and the data set is multidimensional, and then they can find kind of correlations and patterns in there. Now, the problem with that is you have to provide it with a good data set in the first place.
Yeah.
Now, with what we have, we already give someone a good data set. We just don't do much with it afterwards. So we could easily add that kind of functionality afterwards. So someone could ask, why did that happen, or what happened here? Just tell me what happened. And, because of the way that the semantic layer operates, even if the original query was quite simple and only had one dimension in it, we know from the semantic layer, it could have another 27 other ones in there if we wanted to pull them in. And you could pull them in automatically in order to flip through the permutations and find those answers. So what I mean.
The thing I'm trying to work out with this is, like, I remember 10 years ago, like, that kind of multi-regression analysis work, like Einstein kind of stuff is already there. That's not the LLM way.
No, it's not new.
I'm just interested to see if this stuff is going to be like, and that never really took off. I'm interested to see if this is, I mean, it feels like now is a different environment where we're more willing to have this, or we're more able to execute products in a really powerful, elegant experience for this stuff to actually come through.
Part of me also thinks the reason why that didn't happen was people were trying to sell those things as standalone tools, and actually they needed to be part of something bigger. And so because we're selling that as part of an additional thing to Cube, like that, I don't feel like that's us trying to sell it on its own. And I think that's why, it's always a GTM problem, right? It's not usually a product problem.
And I guess the other question I want to ask is, you've given a good sense of like where you think things are going, where it's being used now. I guess back to it's not the silver bullet. Like, what do you think? I think there could be a few, like, if we don't implement elegantly, could create more problems. I think, like, where we think that AI isn't really going to be the silver bullet. Like, where do you see in the market, in the way we're thinking about it, there are still going to be issues that are going to remain, or could be worse?
So I feel like I split the use of AI and data into like two themes. Like, one is production, which I've talked about, which is like access and delving into things and perhaps monitoring. Then development is where you have like the idea of a co-pilot or an AI-powered ID. And, I used one of those when I was doing my SQLMesh series, and it was absolutely incredible. And I think that's where you'll power development and engineering. You'll power like cold start problems where people have to get started with something. No, the AI can help them get onboarded in like minutes. And they can also help them continuously improve what they've got. And I think that's like with development, and that's where we'll see AI help data people. And primarily, I think those will be data or analytics engineers, maybe analysts who get that benefit. And then the production benefits are for the consumers, really.
And then, so that makes sense. Totally get that's more benefits. Like, what do you think are the weaknesses so far? Like, what is going to be the struggle?
I think the weaknesses that I'm concerned about actually are that so many people are selling a tool of some kind, and a lot of them are like poorly thought out, poor quality, and some of them are downright dangerous.
I think the AI implementation is poorly thought through. It's a gold rush mentality. Just get it in rather than.
That's the thing. We're right in the middle of a very maybe the final gold rush. I don't know, right?
Okay.
And people are just trying and throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I'm worried that, number one, teams will try the wrong tool and they'll get in trouble. They'll get their fingers burnt, and they're like, no, I just want to use old stuff that I know works. And that may suit them, but it will also weaken them going forward. Because the truth is that AI is unavoidable. Like in the two ways I described, it's going to be enhancing the way we work.
It's nothing else is a productivity tool. If you don't have that productivity tool, well, you're going to get that efficiency, that competitiveness in a different place. It's hard to find a different area. But like all tools, you can apply it to the wrong problems, basically, or in the wrong way.
Exactly.
Yeah. I guess I think my view of that is similar, right? Like the barrier to insight, which you described, is really powerful. The time to insight is clear, but we already have a sense that we already have a sense of where it can go wrong. Like we already have BI tools with semantic layers in them where people can build their own metrics off a solid metric, filter differently, and there could be 5 different versions of the same metric floating around. You can still have disagreements at a human level, though it's all logically consistent, like the code is not wrong. You can still have disagreements for what really matters. You can still have consensus being reached. The human layer is the same layer, and that's the if you think of it that way around, we've got to, how do you help the humans work, think, and collaborate better? That's certainly what we think about it in terms of account is.
Yeah, and this is where I've seen like some of the things you've worked on around like metric trees, where, you know, instead of everyone trying to find the metric that matters, now you've told them these are the metrics that feed up into our overarching mission and strategy as a company. Focus on these, and we know exactly how, or at least roughly how they affect the next metric in the tree. And so people aren't having to scrabble around and make things up and make variants of known metrics. No, they can just use the ones that they have in front of them. And I think that's really important as well.
Exactly. It's that communication layer back to the human is super important. I'm going to move us on. We're running out of time. We're going to move on to a question, because every session we ask for our community for a kind of anonymous question to throw at the guest. And I've got one for you. I'm going to throw it to you now, and I'm going to put it now rather than a bit later in the show because it's really relevant. So I'll read it to you now. Let me know what you think. The question is as follows. I've just joined a new company in the last 6 months. It's been going well so far, other than my CEO keeps sending me videos from LinkedIn showing AI automated dashboards and agents. I'm staring at 250 dashboards, all showing a different sales number. Any advice for how I manage expectations here?
So for me, like, I think I've probably answered this question, right?
Maybe that's true. Yeah.
And you know, for me, the answer to having 250 dashboards with 250 different versions of revenue is having a governed version of revenue, so everyone isn't writing code to define it every time they use it. And that effectively is a semantic layer as a solution. So that's that. On the basis of your CEO telling you to use a different AI tool every day or whatever they're doing, that's just going to generate more versions of the truth and more chaos without that semantic layer being in place. Because then once you have that governed version of the truth, you can connect how many tools, you can connect 100 tools to it. You'll still get consistent answers because these are defined and governed by the semantic layer.
That's right. And I also would say, I think you're right. It's about that kind of simplification first, and showing, just point the CEO to all the different versions and say, this is the first problem we've got to solve before we can move on to anything more experiential on it.
Yeah.
And there's also, I think, back to the thing about, like, you can have 100 tools with it offering. You can also make the mistake of having semantic layer and think everything's going to be consistent. You can still have 2 reports from the same semantic layer showing different numbers if a user's
or
one of the wrong things. There's still a degree of operational clarity and consolidation and like clarity to provide on top of the metrics. I think that's the other thing I would say is it's a human problem, not just a technological problem.
I think we're getting to a point as well where maybe you could have an AI solution where you're looking at 2 cells in a BI tool from 2 different dashboards and say, tell me why these cells are different. And it will just look at the JSON that's defining that graph and say, well, that's because you've got this filter on this one and not on the other. And it just makes it so much easier.
Yeah. That's it. Like, Mass, that's a good shout. It's a good shout. I'm going to pass it to the product team. I'm joking. Okay, David, you've been great. Thanks so much for sharing what's going on in your mind, how you're thinking about it, how to frame the different pockets of innovation here. I just have one more question for you, just to learn from you and your story. If you can, tell us the one thing that you wish you told yourself as you first got into data. What's the one piece of insight that you now know that you wished you'd known from the start?
I think this goes for pretty much all engineering and non-technical roles. Is you are always doing sales, right? Everyone does sales. You just maybe don't realize you're having to do it and you're doing it badly. And that's one thing I tell my younger self is you still need to sell things. You need to sell your dashboards. You need to sell your data sets. You need to sell the project you want to do. You need to sell yourself. You need to sell your ideas. Everything gets sold. And it's kind of like this concept of sales, but sales is also, a huge part of sales is storytelling. Like the Venn diagram between sales and storytelling is hugely overlapped.
Yeah.
And that's, you need that. Otherwise, and it's a superpower. If you get really good at that, you can go really far in your career, probably further than if you are technically brilliant, to be honest. And you see these consultants who are working in our space, in the data space, but they may not actually be very technically gifted, but because they're so good at storytelling and the sale of it, they do immensely well.
Yeah, the art of persuasion is a powerful thing, and if you're internal focused, let alone externally focused. I love that. Thank you, David, so much. That's all we have time for. I'm so grateful for you for sharing your wisdom. If you want to find David, go get his Substack. Go find him on Blue Sky or on LinkedIn. We'll share some of that stuff in our show notes. If you want to know more about the tenets of value, learn more about Count or other episodes we've done, please go to the show notes or count.co/MTN. Thank you all. Thank you, David. See you soon.
Thanks so much for having me.